You are going to press a button. Not yet. Not for another hour. Right now you are standing at your station in the control room of Reactor Number 4, watching the gauges, making your notes, doing the job you have been doing for 3 years. The job you are good at. The job you studied for, trained for, gave your 20s to. The room smells of cigarette smoke and old coffee and the specific metallic air of a space that runs on electricity and tension. The gauges are lit. The needles are moving. Everything is in its place. It is 1:20 in the morning. You have been on shift since midnight. In your left hand you have a logbook. In your right hand you have a pen. You are writing down numbers. Numbers that will later be studied by people in many countries for many years. Numbers that tell a story you do not yet know you are telling. And in 1 hour, you will press a button. The button is called AZ5. It is the emergency shutdown button. It is supposed to stop the reactor. Every operator in every nuclear plant in the Soviet Union knows this button. You have pressed it in simulations dozens of times. Your hand knows the motion. Your body knows it. Tonight the button will not stop the reactor. Tonight the button will end the world as this region knows it. But you do not know that yet. You are just writing down numbers, and the gauges are moving, and everything seems fine. This is a story about the night someone pressed a button and changed everything. Not a villain, not a fool. A young man doing his job in the small hours of a Friday night in April, following orders he had not written, running a test that had been postponed 3 times, in a reactor he had been trained to trust. He was 25 years old. He had been a senior reactor control engineer for less than a year. He was careful. His colleagues respected him. His supervisors considered him competent. He pressed the button at 1:23 and 40 seconds. The button was supposed to insert control rods into the reactor and slow the nuclear reaction. Every nuclear plant operator in the world understands this principle. You insert the rods, the reaction slows, the reactor shuts down. It is one of the most basic safety mechanisms in nuclear engineering. But what nobody in that control room knew, what the operators had not been told, what the designers had not disclosed, what the Soviet nuclear establishment had kept quiet for years, was that Reactor Number 4 had a flaw. A fundamental flaw in the design of the control rods themselves. When you inserted them in certain conditions, they briefly increased the reaction before slowing it. Not for long, a few seconds, but in a reactor that was already in an unstable state, a few seconds was everything. The button that was supposed to stop the disaster started it. His name was Leonid Toptunov. He died 14 days later in a Moscow hospital from acute radiation syndrome. He was 25 years old. He never fully understood what had happened. In the days between the explosion and his death, he went over it again and again. The readings, the sequence, the button, trying to find the moment where he had made the mistake. He had not made a mistake. The mistake was made years before he arrived. In this story, you are Leonid. You are at the console. The night is almost over. The test is almost done. In this story, you are the reactor operator. The control room is yours. The numbers on the gauges are yours. And the button is right there, where it has always been, waiting. You became a nuclear engineer because you believed in it. This is worth saying at the start. Because later, in the accounts written about this night, in the investigations, in the documentaries made by people in other countries who had reasons to tell the story in particular ways, the men in this control room are sometimes described as careless, as reckless, as Soviet bureaucrats following orders without thinking. That is not who you are. You came to this work through mathematics. You were good at it from the time you were small, the kind of good that your teachers noticed and your parents were proud of, the kind that opens doors in a country where the doors to a technical education are opened by grades and nothing else. You studied at the Moscow Energy Institute. You graduated with marks that got you this posting. And you came to Chernobyl 3 years ago, and you learned the reactor the way a doctor learns anatomy. Systematically, seriously, with the understanding that the knowledge mattered and that getting it wrong had consequences. The RBMK reactor is not simple. It is a graphite-moderated, water-cooled reactor, a design used only in the Soviet Union, a design that your country is proud of because it can be built without enriched uranium, which is expensive, and because it can be refueled while running, which is efficient. It is a large reactor. The core is 7 meters tall and 12 meters across. It contains over 1,600 fuel channels. The control room that manages it has hundreds of gauges, dozens of systems, years of operational data running through it at every moment. You know this reactor. You know it the way you know your own apartment. And the sounds it makes, the readings that are normal, and the readings that are slightly off, and what the difference means. You have been sitting at this console for 3 years, and you have learned to read it the way a musician reads music, not consciously decoding each symbol, but understanding it all at once, the whole picture arriving as a single impression. Tonight the picture is not quite right. Tonight it has not been quite right for several hours. But the test must be completed. The test has already been postponed 3 times. It was supposed to happen in 1983, then 1984, then 1985. Each time something came up. The grid needed the power. The schedule changed. The paperwork was not ready. And each postponement meant another year of the reactor running without completing this particular safety verification. Tonight is the night. The plant director has said so. The test will happen tonight, on this shift, before the scheduled maintenance shutdown. The day shift waited for permission from Kiev and did not get it until the evening. So, the night shift got the test. Your shift. The test is about turbines. Specifically, it is about what happens to the turbines when the reactor loses power in an emergency. This is a real safety question. If the reactor shuts down in an emergency, it still needs cooling water pumped through the core to prevent the fuel from overheating. The pumps that move the cooling water require electricity. In a total power loss, the diesel backup generators take 60 to 75 seconds to come online. 60 to 75 seconds is a long time when a nuclear core is generating heat with no cooling. The question is, can the turbines, as they spin down after the reactor shuts off, generate enough electricity to run the cooling pumps for those 60 to 75 seconds? It is a good question. It is an important question. The answer matters for the safety of this plant and plants like it across the Soviet Union. You have read the test protocol. It is 18 pages long. You have gone through it with your shift supervisor, Alexander Akimov. Akimov is 32. He is good at his job. He is also tired. You are all tired. The day shift handed over a reactor that had been held at low power for hours, waiting for permission from the Kiev grid controller, and the waiting has done things to the reactor's internal chemistry that a night of careful work has not fully resolved. The reactor is not in ideal condition for this test. You know this. Akimov knows this. You both know that the reactor's power is lower than the test protocol specifies. The protocol calls for 700 megawatts thermal. You have 200. Less than a third. You discuss this. Anatoly Dyatlov is in the room. He is the deputy chief engineer for operations. He is the senior man present. He is the one who has been pushing to complete this test tonight. He has been pushing for hours. His manner when you raise the power question is not the manner of a man who wants to hear concerns. It is the manner of a man who has decided the test will happen and is waiting for the operators to execute it. You look at Akimov. Akimov looks at you. You begin the test. You are not being reckless. You are not being careless. You are doing what operators in hierarchical organizations do when the person above them, the person who has authority over their career, their posting, their future in this industry, makes clear that the decision has been made. You raise your concerns. They are noted. The test proceeds. This is how accidents happen in complex systems, not through the failure of one person, through the accumulated pressure of an organization moving toward a goal and treating the concerns of the people closest to the machine as obstacles rather than information. The control room of Reactor Number 4 is a large room. It does not look like the control rooms in American films. It does not look sleek or modern or filled with the cool blue light of computer screens. It looks like what it is: a Soviet engineering installation from the 1970s built to function rather than to impress, practical and dense and slightly worn at the edges. The console wraps around three sides of the room. Hundreds of instruments, analog gauges with needles, indicator lights, switches, the kind of panel that requires training to read and years of experience to read quickly. The overhead lights are fluorescent. The room has no windows. Outside these walls it is night and cool, and the town of Pripyat is sleeping, and the Pripyat River is dark, and the sky above Ukraine is clear and full of stars. But you do not know any of this because inside this room there is only the console and the readings and the low sound of the ventilation system. There are about a dozen people in the room tonight. Operators at their stations, supervisors, the test team from the turbine department who are here to monitor their side of the experiment. Dyatlov, walking the floor with the specific energy of a man who is impatient. You are at your station. Your station is the reactor control console. Your job tonight is to manage the reactor's power level, to hold it where it needs to be for the test, to watch the readings and make the adjustments and keep everything inside the parameters. The parameters are tighter than usual tonight. The reactor is behaving in ways that require more attention than usual. You are giving it more attention than usual. That your pen moves across the logbook. The numbers go in. The time is in. Your handwriting is neat. You were always careful about your handwriting. Your mother told you when you were young that a man with neat handwriting was a man who cared about precision. You cared about precision. You are caring about it right now. The clock on the wall says 1:15. The test is proceeding. The reactor has a property that is not in the operating manual you were given. It is not in any manual available to you, or to Akimov, or to anyone in this control room. It is known to the designers. It is known to certain people in Moscow. It is called a positive void coefficient, and it means that under certain conditions, when the coolant water turns to steam, the reactor does not slow down. It speeds up. And in most reactors in the Western world, this property would make the design unacceptable. In this reactor, it was considered a manageable characteristic. The operators were not told because the designers believed it would cause unnecessary concern. You are managing a machine with a dangerous secret, and nobody told you the secret. There is something in the reactor that you cannot see. Xenon 135. A gas, a byproduct of the nuclear reaction, produced constantly as the uranium fuel undergoes fission. Under normal operating conditions, at full power, xenon burns off almost as fast as it is created. It is not a problem at full power, but the reactor has been running at low power since late yesterday afternoon. At low power, xenon builds up. It accumulates in the core, and xenon absorbs neutrons, the particles that keep the nuclear reaction going. Too much xenon and the reaction slows. The reactor wants to shut itself down. This is called xenon poisoning. You know about xenon poisoning. It is in your training. And what your training did not fully emphasize, what the operational culture of this plant did not fully emphasize, was what happens when you try to force a xenon-poisoned reactor back up to power. When you pull out the control rods to compensate for the xenon, you are removing a large portion of your safety margin. The reactor becomes harder to control. Small changes in conditions produce larger swings in power. The machine becomes, not unstable exactly, but sensitive, reactive, less forgiving. Tonight, the reactor has been xenon poisoned for hours. To bring it to the test power level, you and Akimov have pulled out most of the control rods. This is outside normal operating parameters. The rules say the reactor should have at least 15 control rods inserted at all times. Tonight you have fewer, significantly fewer. Dyatlov has seen this. The test continues. You write the numbers in the logbook. Your handwriting is still neat, but your hands are not entirely steady. At one point during the evening, the reactor power dropped unexpectedly and nearly reached zero. You lost it. The power just fell. Akimov looked at you. You looked at the gauges. For a moment, there was the possibility of simply letting it go, of saying, "We cannot complete this test tonight. The reactor is not in the right state. We will try again after the maintenance shutdown." But Dyatlov was there, and the test had been postponed 3 times already, and you brought the power back up. You pulled the rods further out and you coaxed the reactor back to the power level you needed. Later, some investigators would say this was the decision that made everything else inevitable. Maybe it was. You were 25 years old and your supervisor's supervisor was standing behind you, and the test had been postponed 3 times. The turbine test begins. At 1:23 and 4 seconds, the turbine steam valve closes. This is the start of the test. The turbines begin to coast down on their own momentum. The team from the turbine department is watching their gauges. You are watching yours. The next 36 seconds are quiet. The reactor is holding. The power is where it should be. The cooling pumps are running on the power from the coasting turbines. The test is proceeding. Your pen is still. Your eyes are moving across the gauges in the pattern you have practiced for years. Then the readings change. The power begins to rise. Not dramatically, not yet, but the numbers are moving in a direction they should not be moving. The reactor is not holding its power level. It is increasing. The cooling water is turning to steam faster than it should. The steam is reducing the neutron absorption. The reactor is accelerating its own reaction. You see it. Akimov sees it. You both see it at the same moment. Akimov says, "AZ-5. He says it clearly, without panic. The specific calm of a man who has trained for this, who knows the procedure, who is executing the procedure. You reach for the button. Your hand knows the motion. It is 1:23 and 40 seconds. In the 2 seconds before you press the button, the reactor power has already begun to surge. The xenon is burning off. The steam voids are forming faster than the coolant can compensate. The reactor is entering a state that its designers called impossible, and that is happening anyway. The pitted void coefficient. The secret property, the thing nobody told you, is driving the power upward, not linearly, exponentially. The numbers on your gauges are not moving like normal numbers. They are accelerating. In 2 seconds you will press the button, and the button will make it worse. You do not know this. You press the button. Yes. You press AZ-5. The control rods begin to descend into the core. This is supposed to slow the reaction. Every rod that enters the core absorbs neutrons. Absorbed neutrons cannot split uranium atoms. The chain reaction weakens. The power falls. The reactor shuts down. You have done this in simulations. You have done it in your sleep, in the specific way that the body learns repeated physical actions until they become involuntary. Press the button. Rods descend. Reactor stops. For 3 seconds, nothing happens. The control rods are descending. They are entering the core from the top. But each rod has a graphite tip, a design feature intended to improve efficiency during normal operation. When the rods first enter the core, the graphite tips displace the water in the lower section of the reactor. Water absorbs neutrons. Graphite does not. And for the first few seconds of rod insertion, each rod briefly removes neutron absorption before it adds any. The reactor surges. Not a little. The power spikes to levels that the gauges cannot measure. The instruments go off scale. You are looking at gauges that are supposed to tell you what the reactor is doing, and the gauges have stopped telling you anything useful. Because what the reactor is doing is outside the range the gauges were designed for. The fuel begins to shatter. The steam pressure builds in an instant. And then there is a sound. The sound is described differently by every person who heard it. Some say it was like a clap of thunder directly overhead. Some say it was two sounds, a low boom followed immediately by a sharper crack. Some say it was the loudest thing they ever heard. Some say that it was not that loud at all, but that the building moved. You hear it in the control room. The control room is separated from the reactor hall by thick concrete walls. The sound comes through those walls and through the floor and through the air, and it arrives in your body before it arrives in your ears. The building shakes. Something falls from the ceiling. The lights flicker. The lights come back on. You look at Akimov. Akimov looks at you. His face is the face of a man who has just heard something his mind cannot immediately classify. Not fear exactly, not yet. The specific suspended state of a person who has received information that does not fit any existing category and is waiting for the category to arrive. The readings on your console are wrong. Not wrong in the way of a malfunction, wrong in a deeper sense. The reactor pressure is gone. The temperatures that should be rising are not responding correctly. The pumps are showing strange readings. The entire picture that the console is painting is a picture of something that should not be possible. Dyatlov says, "Find out what happened." His voice is controlled. Later, some accounts will describe his reaction in this moment as denial. Perhaps. Or perhaps he is doing what senior people in emergency situations sometimes do, staying in the mode of problem solving rather than catastrophe acknowledging, because catastrophe acknowledging has no immediate practical value, and problem solving does. Akimov tries to inject water into the reactor. You try to read the gauges. The gauges are not giving you a coherent picture, because the coherent picture is the one you do not want to accept. Someone opens the door to the corridor. Through the door comes a smell, not chemical, not burning plastic or metal or any of the smells associated with electrical fires. A smell that is hard to describe to someone who has not encountered it. Sharp, almost sweet. The specific smell of ionized air and high-energy radiation interacting with the atmosphere. You know what that smell means. Your training did not tell you explicitly, but your body knows. Something in you goes very still. A man comes back from the reactor hall. His name is Kodemchuk. He went to check on one of the pumps. He does not come back. Another man is sent to look. He returns, and his face, when he comes through the door, is a different color than it was when he left. He reports that the reactor hall roof is gone. He reports that he can see the sky. He reports things that do not fit the category of a reactor that is still intact. Akimov tells him he is mistaken. Akimov says the reactor is intact. Akimov says this because Akimov cannot yet hold the alternative. You go outside. Not into the reactor hall. The reactor hall is not accessible, but you go outside the building, into the April night, and you look up at Reactor Number 4. The roof of the reactor building is gone. Pieces of it are on the ground around you. Dark pieces of graphite, the graphite from the reactor core, scattered across the ground like rubble from a demolished building. You do not understand immediately what you are looking at. Graphite. Dark and heavy and lying on the ground outside the building. It takes a moment. Then you understand. The graphite is from inside the reactor. The only way graphite from inside the reactor can be outside the reactor is if the reactor is open, if the reactor vessel has been breached. If the explosion that moved the building and took the roof was not a steam explosion in the pipes or the turbine hall, but something much larger, something that opened the reactor itself. You stand in the April night and you look at the graphite on the ground. The sky above you is clear and full of stars. There is a glow over the reactor building, a blue glow in the air above the open core. You do not know the name for what you are seeing. It is Cherenkov radiation, the specific blue light produced by radioactive particles moving through air faster than light can move through air. It is beautiful, in the specific way that dangerous things sometimes have beauty. The air around you is the most radioactive air a living person has stood in. You are not wearing a dosimeter that can measure what is here. The dosimeters available to the operators read up to 3.6 Roentgen. The radiation on the ground where you are standing is measured later at hundreds of Roentgen. The instruments cannot tell you the truth, because the instruments were not built for a truth this large. You go back inside. You do not know how long you were outside. It was long enough. Akimov is still trying to inject water into the reactor. He will continue trying for hours. He believes the reactor is intact and that the cooling systems have failed, and that if he can get water into the core, he can prevent a meltdown. He does not know that there is no core to inject water into, not in the form he is imagining. He works through the night, manually operating valves in corridors where the radiation is high enough to cause immediate biological damage. He will die 4 weeks later, and in the same Moscow hospital as you, from the same cause. He will spend his remaining weeks insisting that he did everything correctly. He did. The system failed him. He worked faithfully inside a system that had been hiding the truth about his reactor for years. Within an hour of the explosion, you begin to feel it. Not pain. Not exactly. The first symptoms of acute radiation syndrome are not dramatic. The body does not announce itself the way it announces a broken bone or a burn. It is subtler, a nausea that begins at the back of the throat and moves downward, a headache that arrives behind the eyes and settles in, a metallic taste in the mouth, like holding a coin on your tongue. You recognize these symptoms. Your training included radiation safety. You know what these symptoms mean. You know the sequence: nausea and headache first, then a period of apparent improvement, then the real damage beginning to show, as the cells that were destroyed by radiation fail to reproduce, and the systems that depend on those cells start to fail. You know the sequence, and you apply it to yourself, and you feel a fear that is different from anything you have felt before. Not the sudden fear of a loud noise or an unexpected danger. A slow fear, a fear with a timeline, a fear that understands the process and has done the math and knows what the math predicts. You keep working. This is important to say. You keep working. You are sick and you are afraid, and you keep working, because the reactor, whatever the reactor has become, whatever the explosion has left, is still a danger to the people around it. And the work of managing that danger is still your work, and you are a person who does his work. At some point before dawn, someone gives you something for the nausea. You vomit anyway. You go back to the console. The numbers on the console are still wrong. They will always be wrong now. By morning, there are 12 people from Unit 4 in the medical station in Pripyat. Then, more. The doctors in Pripyat have no experience with acute radiation syndrome. The town has existed for 10 years, and in 10 years nothing like this has happened. They treat what they can see, burns, shock, and send the most serious cases to Moscow. You are taken to Hospital Number 6 in Moscow, which specializes in radiation injuries. The doctor who admits you has seen cases like yours before, from other accidents, smaller accidents. She does not tell you the statistical survival rate for the dose you have received. She is kind. She gives you what the hospital has to give. The hospital room is white. Everything in it is clean and carefully maintained, and the nurses come in regular intervals, and they are gentle with you. You are in a bed. You have been in this bed for several days. Outside the window is Moscow in spring, but you cannot see the window from where you are lying, and you have not asked to be moved closer to it. The window does not matter very much right now. Your parents have come. Your mother sat beside the bed for 2 days before the doctors asked her to leave for her own safety. The radiation your body is emitting, the radiation that was absorbed into your tissue in the hours on April 26th, when you stood outside looking at the graphite, and worked in the corridors, and sat in the control room that was filling with invisible particles, is still there, in you. And being near you for extended periods is not without risk. She came back the next day. You told her you were sorry. She told you there was nothing to be sorry for. You both understood that this was a thing people say, that it was the right thing to say, and that it was also not quite true. You think about the button. You go over it. The sequence, the readings, the moment Akimov said a Z5 and you reached for the button. You have gone over it hundreds of times in the days since the explosion, in the ambulance, in the first hospital, in this bed. You are trying to find the moment where you made the wrong decision. You cannot find it. You did what you were trained to do. You pressed the button you were supposed to press. The button did not do what it was supposed to do, and you cannot understand why. Nobody explains it to you, not fully. And the doctors who visit you are doctors. The officials who come are officials. Nobody sits beside your bed and says, "Here is what the design flaw was. Here is why the graphite tips caused a power surge. Here is why the button made it worse." You are 25 years old, and you are dying of a thing you pressed a button to prevent, and nobody tells you why the button was wrong. You are not alone in this room in the sense of being without visitors. But you are alone in the way that matters. Akimov is in the hospital too, a different room. You have not seen him. Your other colleagues from that night are somewhere in these corridors. You are all going through the same process, the same sequence of symptoms, the same calculations about what the numbers mean. And you are all going through it without a full explanation. The Soviet Union is not in the business of giving full explanations to the people most entitled to them. 14 days after the explosion, UD. Not dramatically, not the way the movies show death, you diminish. The body's systems that were destroyed by the radiation stop, maintaining themselves one by one, in the specific order that acute radiation syndrome takes them. The bone marrow, the lining of the digestive tract, the immune system. The body becomes unable to do the basic things that bodies do to remain bodies. The nurses are kind. The hospital does everything it can. What it can do is not enough. There is no treatment for a dose as large as what you received. There are only measures to make the remaining time as comfortable as possible, and to maintain the body's functions for as long as possible, and to be present and kind in the moments that remain. You are present too. You are conscious through much of it. The mind, which was not in the direct path of the radiation the way the body was, stays clearer than the body. You think, you remember, you go over the night in your mind one more time, and then again, and then you stop going over it because the going over it does not change anything, and you are tired. You think about the reactor, not the explosion. The reactor, as you knew it before, the gauges in their correct positions, the needles in their normal ranges, the logbook open, the numbers going in, the handwriting neat, the job you were good at, the years you spent learning it, the specific satisfaction of understanding a complex system and managing it well, of being the person in the room who knew what the numbers meant. You knew what the numbers meant. Right up until the numbers meant something that nobody had prepared you for. The room is white. The nurses are kind. Your mother came back this morning. She is sitting beside the bed. She is holding your hand. Her hand is warm. Outside the window, Moscow is having a spring day. The trees are doing what trees do in April. You can hear birds faintly through the glass. You close your eyes. The logbook is still at the plant. The last numbers you wrote are still there. Neat, precise, yours. Close your eyes. The room is white. Your mother is here. You did your job. The button was wrong. You were not. A note of history. Leonid Fedorovich Toptanov was born on August 16, 1960, in Efremov, Russia. He graduated from the Moscow Energy Institute and began working at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1983. On the night of April 25 to 26, 1986, he was serving as senior reactor control engineer on the night shift of Unit 4. He was 25 years old. The safety test conducted that night was a legitimate engineering exercise, determining whether the coasting turbines could power the cooling pumps during the 60 to 75-second gap before backup diesel generators came online. The test had been attempted and postponed 3 times previously. The protocol required a reactor power level of 700 to 1,000 megawatts thermal. The actual power level at the time of the test was approximately 200 megawatts, well below specifications. And the RBMK 1000 reactor had a design characteristic known as a positive void coefficient. When coolant water turned to steam in the lower portions of the core under certain conditions, the nuclear reaction intensified rather than slowed. This property was most dangerous at low power levels. The operators were not informed of this characteristic. Soviet nuclear authorities considered the information potentially alarming and had not disclosed it in upper operational manuals or training programs. The control rods of the RBMK reactor had graphite tips. When inserted into the reactor, the graphite tips briefly displaced water in the lower core before the neutron-absorbing portion of the rod could take effect. In a reactor already experiencing a power surge, this 2 to 3 second delay caused a brief additional power increase. This design flaw was known to the reactor's designers. It was not corrected. It was not disclosed. At 1:23:40 on April 26, 1986, Alexander Akimov ordered the AZ-5 emergency shutdown. Toptanov pressed the button. The control rods descended. The graphite tips caused a power spike. Within 3 seconds, the reactor power reached an estimated 30,000 megawatts, 10 times its maximum design output. The steam pressure destroyed the reactor vessel. 2 explosions occurred in rapid succession. The second explosion blew off the 1,000-ton reactor lid and opened the core to the atmosphere. Leonid Toptanov received a radiation dose estimated at between 16 and 16.5 gray, a lethal dose. He was evacuated to Hospital Number 6 in Moscow, which specialized in radiation injuries. He died on May 14, 1986, 14 days after the explosion, from acute radiation syndrome. He was 25 years old. Alexander Akimov also died on May 11, 1986, from acute radiation syndrome. He was 32. In his final days, he repeatedly stated that he could not understand what had gone wrong, that he and his team had followed all procedures correctly. He was right. The Soviet government's investigation initially blamed the operators. Later investigations, including those conducted after the Soviet Union's collapse, concluded that the fundamental causes were the reactor's design flaws and a safety culture that suppressed information and discouraged the raising of concerns. Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer who supervised the test, survived. He received a serious but non-lethal radiation dose, and he was tried and convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp. He served 3 years before being released due to illness. He maintained until his death in 1995 that he had acted correctly and that the accident was caused by the reactor's undisclosed design flaws. The logbook from the Unit 4 control room for the night of April 25 to 26, 1986, survived the explosion. It was recovered and studied extensively. The entries made by Toptanov and others that night remain a primary document of the accident. The handwriting in the early entries is regular and precise. In the final entries before the explosion, the handwriting changes slightly. The numbers are still there, still correct, still carefully recorded by a young man doing his job on the last night of the world he knew. Next, the firefighter. And he arrived within minutes. Nobody told him what was burning.